I'm JP Rangaswami. I'm Chief Scientist at Salesforce. I've been here for just over a month. And in many ways, coming here has been like the culmination of a dream. Because ever since I discovered information technology, when I first played with a Commodore PET in the late 70s, ever since I started working in information technology over 30 years ago, I've felt that there's a gap between the potential of information technology and the value created in the hands of the end user.
Okay.
And I've sort of experienced that battle, which has usually been about ROI, about the business value generated, the screams about large budgets or large capital expenditures or staff intensity. It's been one of these strange cases where everyone keeps wanting to spend more and more and everyone keeps getting dissatisfied. And in the good times, it's very hard to keep track of prices in that kind of environment. And in the tough times, you see lots of anger and resentment about the costs of IT.
Yeah.
And so every time there's been a recession, IT has been the place where people come to get beaten up. Every time there's a boom, it's a place people have spent a lot of money to say we have to be on this wave. But something has been fundamentally broken. And what I've been tracking as the cloud, is actually the culmination of, I guess, a number of movements that are changing that. Standardization of infrastructure, commoditization of that environment, virtualization that allows that environment to become fungible, people building services to take advantages of those movements.
Yeah.
And suddenly we are at a new world where we are actually able to get the services we want, scalable and elastic, when we want it, sort of truly on demand, because these are things we've been speaking about for a while.
Yeah.
Grid and utility and on demand, but I never saw budgets drop to relate to that.
I see, yeah.
I still saw a lot of the painful administrative work. And one of the first principles I learned within IT was about refactoring. Right? You you look at a stack, you look at a set of flows, and when you see something that is common and it is sort of standardizable, you take it out to simplify the rest.
Right.
And we've taken this long to take out some of the things that no IT department should have to be doing.
Right.
When we can all sort of move upstream and deal with more value-added stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the sort of the entry.
Okay. So what would you say, what kind of impact has Enterprise 2.0 and all these tools on a leadership role?
I think there are three impacts. The first impact is that we used to organize into hierarchies because it was very expensive to sit and communicate with everybody. Okay? While it was possible to broadcast into a large group, it was very, very expensive to get bottom-up interaction as effective. So what did you do? You created small teams and aggregated them up into team leaders and aggregated team leaders into sort of departments and departments into functions or whatever. I mean, you created the hierarchies because it was easier to manage the resources that way, particularly in terms of how you prioritize those resources, what objectives they had, how you dealt with conflict or contention for priorities, and how you got feedback loops on what was actually happening.
Okay.
With today's tools, it is actually possible to flatten the organization and to have those feedback loops active between a large number of people without the potential risk and the corruption of having to aggregate it. Okay, because whenever you aggregate, you start getting summary data, and that sort of weakens the communications process. But that is just seen from the top of the organization. There are other elements as well. When you construct hierarchies, people don't actually find it easy to talk across hierarchies.
What do you mean across hierarchies?
Well, what will actually happen is that if you've got one department looking at that, another department looking at that,
if you have silos,
the natural silo that comes because of the hierarchy makes it hard for people to operate that way.
Okay.
So you'd go up and then down.
You're going to lose a lot going this way.
And it slows you down.
Of course.
Okay? And it's not the natural way people would want to communicate. So if we're really moving, which is what I sense we are, from a sort of hierarchies of customers and products to networks of relationships and capabilities, then we have to understand that the second thing these tools do is that they accentuate and enhance lateral communication. So now you actually find out what the information flows in the organization are, because our departments and our functions and our structures aren't actually the organization. They are our way of trying to manage the organization. Okay? And it was needed at a time when we didn't scale well, when we had analog ways of being able to deal with it. Right? Why an army would have the kind of structures of platoon and division and brigade and all that was for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? You wanted to have an effective way of giving orders, you wanted to have sort of self-contained leadership at certain levels, but you also wanted to get the most efficient operating unit possible. But that changes when you start saying you've got these tools. So I think that the big change for organizational leadership is the fact that you no longer have to have a hierarchy you can afford to flatten.
Are you saying we don't need any hierarchies at all?
No.
When do we need hierarchies and when do we need network kind of leadership skills?
There will always be. I mean, while there has been a considerable amount of research done about emergent behaviors and whether the slime mold actually has a leader, and you see sort of birds in flight and you see various swarming behaviors, to question whether these sort of behaviors actually need leadership. We actually still have, largely in the corporate world, a requirement to deal with the reporting cycles and planning horizons that reflect either the owner's wishes in a private world or the shareholders' wishes in a public world.
Right.
And therefore, what we may see as a willingness to take on emergent behaviors still has to be rooted in the financial construct of quarterly reporting and annual reports and figures and charts of accounts, etc.
Yeah.
And that means that you need to have at least enough hierarchy to be able to synchronize the planning and execution horizons of work with the planning and execution horizons of the finances that reflect that work.
So you wouldn't say that leadership belongs to the network?
I would say that leadership belongs to the network, absolutely, but that the financial aspects of leadership are not easy to model in the network. So the hierarchy is necessary to represent that, but the actual leadership does not need the hierarchy. Okay.
What kind of skills do you see leaders in the future need to have?
Well, we've actually been seeing and hearing this for the last 20 years, okay? Initially, we were using terms like soft hands leadership. Then we saw servant leadership sort of themes come through. I've been speaking for a while about leadership having to get out of the way. Okay, and it's a hard question in some ways. Okay, why would you want to hire a really smart person and then tell them what to do. Okay?
It's kind of stupid.
It's kind of stupid because you might as well have got a dumb person if what you want to do is tell them all the time what to do.
And pay less for it.
So if we're living in a world where the most valuable asset to an environment or to an organization is the knowledge work of the employee, and we're making, there is a war for that talent, that it's getting harder to get those right skills, and we know that there is nothing more important than that, then it sort of makes sense, how are you going to leverage that? And then you learn from things like open source communities, or one of the themes I've now been following for the last 6 months, which is designing for loss of control.
Designing for loss of control.
Yeah. So you actually make it a design objective that you don't have control of the edge. Now what does it look like? Okay, learning.
Software kind of product, yeah.
Yeah, well, a telco had to deliver phones without knowing what the device was in the house. Okay?
Yeah.
For most of their life, they knew the device at the end, the device belonged to them, and they knew the color of the device. Everything was controlled end to end. And then we moved into a different world where you could buy your phone from anybody, and the telco still had to provide the service.
Yeah.
IT is facing a similar problem. It used to say lockdown desktop. Now more and more people are saying, I'm going to bring my own laptop to work. You have to survive. The IT department is being told, you don't know whether the person's using a BlackBerry or a Nokia smartphone or an iPhone or an iPad or an Android tablet. You're just going to have to make your services work.
But many companies just don't allow this. I mean, especially many huge companies, they say you are not allowed to use, for example, an iPhone. I mean, iPad is actually the first Apple device who really makes it into big companies very officially.
Yeah.
But, many IT departments in huge companies simply say no.
Yeah,
the same thing with open source software, like using wikis, they have to use SharePoint or...
Yeah, but it is because it's easier for them to make the decision, because any of these things carry risk. It's like people saying nobody got fired for buying IBM. Nobody got fired for buying Microsoft.
Yeah.
Right? For sure, these things take some risks up, but they leave some money on the table. So, now when I look at the same sort of thing, saying, well, what was different about the iPad that suddenly we started seeing corporates getting interested in using it?
Yeah.
Okay. Part of it might have been argued to say cost. The unit cost of an iPad was not as high as the unit cost of a full-fledged laptop when the laptops were coming out.
Right.
Part of it could be seen as, well, it's the first significant shift in input technology since graphical user interfaces were designed 40 years ago, 68 or so. Part of it might have been, no, this App Store model is actually something really worth looking at as to how you want to deliver service in a corporate. But I think the biggest reason is that the people coming into the organization as employees are stating it is their device of choice. It is convenient. It has significant battery life for what it is. It provides a good browser capability because of what the knowledge worker does.
Yeah.
But I'm challenging one of your questions. The large corporates that were saying this are having to face change at a speed that they couldn't cope with earlier. Okay? So today they're not actually shouting, you will not, thou shalt not. They're saying it while behind the scenes they're all busy working out how do we move with this. Okay? Because they said it about BlackBerries. Okay? I remember. They said it about mobile phones. They've said it about push mail as a result.
Right.
And yet these things still happened. Okay? They said it about laptops even before that. And it happened. So it's going to happen.
It's
It's
just
a question of
when.
Correct. And in the lead up to that, we are always going to be faced with safety and security as critical issues. We live in a world where in a period of 24 hours, one man who builds a system that is going to help individuals make their secrets open becomes Times Man of the Year.
It did not.
Sorry? No. I'm talking about Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay.
Okay?
I thought you were talking about the other one.
Well, the point is, the man who made it easy for people to give their personal secrets away was Facebook.
Yeah,
Okay?
you're right.
But another man who was also in the business of giving secrets away came second or whatever, but was in jail at the time and only just got released. What does it actually mean for us? That whether we know all the answers, we have this tension between privacy, confidentiality, secrecy on the one hand, and collaboration, sharing, and community on the other. And there is a generation conflict going on. Because the older generation are still saying, you are crazy, thou shalt not share, information is power, you keep it together, this is a confidence, we put our trust in you, you have failed our trust, etc. And at the same time, the kid is saying, I'll share what I feel, I'll share what I do, I'll share where I am, I'll share what I eat, I'll share everything, and something beautiful will happen.
Yeah. So you are saying, the whole thing started and we can't stop it. It will happen sooner
Absolutely.
or later.
It is happening.
It is happening already.
Correct.
Okay. But again, still, even if you look at smaller companies or, again, bigger companies, when you look at an organigram, you say organigram, it still says head of. Underneath or above is the director, and then is the CIO. Underneath a couple of more hierarchy. How would a modern organigram look like?
Okay, I think that
and how can a company deal with the fact if they do have the crosslinks between the departments? How does this affect structures which have been set up for decades almost?
Centuries. Yeah.
Centuries, yeah.
I think that, we've tried this a number of times, but we have not necessarily had the information flows nor the sort of infrastructure to be able to do it right. But what you need is a dynamic reallocation of resources possible in a matrix. So one axis of the reporting organization will be looking at managing the skills and the development and the costs and the benefits. And another matrix will be looking at acquiring those skills into teams that are for assignments at a time. Okay. I'm learning more from video games than anything else as to how the modern world will work in that context, because when you see a 21st century video game, the first thing that you do is that you have some ability, like a sandbox, a training ground, a trial, a simulation, where you're not playing the game yet, you're just learning. Okay? That kind of sandbox capability is going to come out everywhere at work. When you finish that, the next thing that happens to you is you're able to go in and say you're okay, you're at novice level, and you've got your basic understanding of what power you have, what tools you have, and you have some way of dashboard of looking at environmental feedback.
Yeah.
And then you go out discovering other people you want to work with in order to complete quests or missions. Okay? So that kind of structure which I see in a video game will start reflecting itself in an organization where people will be responsible. When you build a video game, there's one team that looks after making smoke. There's one team that looks after light effects. There's one team that looks after the motion of avatars. The horizontalizing of those services is a critical element to the matrix, because that means that in a large organization, like to take an analogy, the horizontal teams are the people who look after the building and the developing of the skills, the game mechanics, the environment, the rules, enabling people to do something.
Okay.
And then whenever there is a mission or request, there is a separate group of people saying, I need 3 of this kind of skill, I need 2 of this kind of skill, I need 1 of this kind of skill, and the 6 together are going to now deliver. Okay? What you see happening in the cloud, and like I said, that's why I said it's like a dream to be where I am, is this real concept of horizontalizing and then giving you the ability to sort of go for high cohesion, loose coupling of the vertical. The tightly integrated vertical stack, which was what the old model of the organization was too rigid, did not have the agility to respond to the market.
Wasn't flexible enough.
So it was great on reporting and poor on execution. Okay, great on control, but poor on adaptability.
Yeah, but if you build these networks, as you just described, this also means that people become more responsible for what they are doing.
Absolutely.
So, on the other hand, from the enterprise point of view, would you say that these new kind of leadership also require, for example, a new kind of, let's say, payment methods? How you incentives, like, new models of sharing enterprise money?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll find that because historically, one of the reasons why it has almost never been possible to put team bonuses in is because we carried on talking about teamwork and collaboration, but the truth was that the incentive structures were about not sharing, but about hoarding power, hoarding information, and using that to leverage a disproportionate amount of the money that you would generate.
How would you evaluate a team impact? Like, what could be the criteria to say this team made this and this impact?
Well, I think we will still land up with payment in 2 forms. Right? One payment which is to do with your skill and what you bring. Now, this is the horizontal resource element.
Yeah.
You will price that according to the market.
Okay.
What is the supply? What is the demand? How many such resources are there? So you get a price which is the base price for the resource. And beyond that, there is a reward for success. There is a reward for outperformance.
Which is not individual based, but also
that can have an individual component, that can have a team component, that can have a group component, because that is actually related to outcomes. So effectively, we have to distinguish the price of the resource in a supply and demand context from the reward given to the resource for success, and one will be almost fixed and will form the base cost of the resource, and the other will be variable based on results. So we've had this salary plus bonus total comp approach for a while. We've tried balanced scorecards as a way. A lot of companies have tried to put that in a team way, but they're not as they create still some level of rigidity, because you're putting a scorecard together at the start of the year. It is almost impossible to change the scorecard every week to reflect it.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So how do you get that? Because effectively, we don't have to solve the problem of the fixed cost because we know how to do that. We have to solve the problem of the variable benefit. Okay?
Do you see any good examples already in the industry, in the markets out there?
I go back to video games. Okay, it becomes quite clear when you're playing even rudimentary games that if you complete a quest, certain things will accrue to you and to your team. Okay, so is there a pot of gold? Are these a set of gold coins? Do you get weaponry on top? Do you get an extra life? Do you get energy that is going to sustain you? Do you get tools that are going to make you hyperspeed?
Yeah.
So when you do certain things, you acquire these extra skills or attributes of value. Okay, that has always been the case within gaming. Now, when you go through the massively multiplayer games, you're now talking about groups of people acquiring prizes
Right.
for completing quest submissions. And there's a way of sharing that which tends to be equitable, which gets worked out through the game mechanics. And if we can solve that in a virtual world, we're already simulating things that have meaning. Okay,
Yeah.
but there are many other lessons that come from the social world. Okay,
For example?
the ability to say, "I like what you did." Okay, so the reward mechanisms can sometimes be based on your peers
Okay.
recognizing and rating what you did.
Okay.
Because it is again harder to game rather than one person's relatively narrow view.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
it is something we've tried to do. We called it 360 feedback.
Yeah.
Okay? But 360 feedback was an arbitrary event. Right? What happens if you make it 360 continuous feedback? And what happens if you make it voluntary? Okay?
Yeah.
So that,
These are the essential questions.
I'm a fan of this person.
Yeah.
Okay? Thank you for sending me this email. It really helped me.
Yeah.
I found the answer to your question really useful.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have to start saying, how are we going to create a way of recognizing these things happen? So virtual currencies may be one of the routes. That individuals are given pots that they distribute in order to enhance behaviors that they like.
Okay.
And when those pots are distributed, winners and losers emerge for the variable reward. Because, you are now, it is your peers who are rewarding you for the work done. So, it's almost like saying if everybody in a company started with 200 units of bling or something.
Yeah.
And through the year, every time you saw something you liked in that company,
Yeah.
you saw a behavior you appreciated or assistance was given, you gave that person a token. And at the end of the year, the net tokens were checked. One of the important things is your original tokens.
Yeah.
Well, the point is that, like we saw with Linden dollars,
Right.
right, virtual currencies very soon lead to an exchange rate and a conversion into real currency.
Yeah.
Very similar markets could come, right? Equity schemes, we used to say startups could only trade and create value through IPOs. Then gray markets started emerging. Now stock is actively traded in
Right.
many startups. So yesterday's, Twitter 3.5 billion valuation, or the Facebook talk of whether it's 35 or 50 billion. Right?
Amazing.
The concept of saying part of what you get paid for is not cash but equity is perfectly reasonable. And if you only get paid when your company is doing well, then the shareholder rip-off is avoided because your benefits are completely tied.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think we're seeing the reward mechanisms change, but again, I don't want to say nothing happened. We always are already in our future. This is William Gibson sort of, it is just unevenly distributed.
Right.
What we started with is peer reviews. What we then said was 360 feedback. The difference now is we have tools. You can rate and rank people very quickly.
Yeah. So when you open up these silos, these departments within enterprises, you actually already allow, at least in your mindset, you allow that from different areas, different leaders or leaders by reputation will show up. I mean, isn't there some kind of conflict from those who have the written reputation by function, like they are head of finance or they are head of...
No, I think, obviously we're going through a transition. And as the hierarchy moved towards the networked organization, there are going to be some tensions. So I'm not saying that won't happen.
Yeah.
But I actually think that the role-based leadership and outcome-based sort of teams, they are going to operate in a parallel world to the hierarchy of the classic career development and sort of basic prudent controls.
Yeah.
Right? And it isn't a problem to do that as long as the matrix is understood. The issue is that if the reward mechanism is right, then the people who are sort of on-the-job leaders will not want to fight for becoming functional heads. Okay? The big challenge was that the historical model said, we believe in a flat organization, we believe in collaboration, we believe that it's what you do that matters, but under the surface, your headcount mattered, your P&L mattered, your budget size mattered.
Yeah.
So we would say one thing, but we couldn't actually cope. Today, I'm in a job where I'm really enjoying myself, but in terms of the number of people I have reporting to me, it is the same as my first day of work. 0.
Okay.
Now, that's a 31-year gap, saying I started with 0 and I'm back at 0. But actually, this new 0 is very, very exhilarating.
Okay.
Because now, and this is, I feel, the final stages of leadership I'm learning about, which is leading through influence and guidance, where you still are accountable for results, right? But you do not have the end-to-end control of any of the resources to achieve those results. Okay? Which means your brand matters, your reputation matters, the way you behave will determine whether other people will listen to you or not. So how your network of relationships listens to you or doesn't, how they feed you back, because it's not a one-way street. Every teacher is actually a student. Okay, every leader must understand.
Don't tell them.
Sorry?
Don't tell them.
No, it's true. A good teacher will constantly be learning.
Absolutely.
Okay, in the same way, a really good leader will constantly be following. Okay, because leadership is not a one-way street. If you don't understand authority, then you can't use authority.
Yeah.
So I must understand whom I'm under authority to, and then say, what is my soft hands leadership? How do I guide and help and assist people who don't work for me? Okay, and how do I do that in a way that I can, this is why I love chatter. Okay, but what actually happens is that we start becoming, we create an information bus within the enterprise, to which instead of a broadcast model, we actually go into publish and subscribe. Okay? One of the big challenges of broadcast model is power is in the hands of the broadcaster. Okay?
That's a shifting.
That shift. Now power is in the hands of the recipient.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Now almost my last question, actually. We were talking already, or in your answers, you were already talking very much also about a cultural shift, corporate culture shift.
Yeah.
How do corporate culture and this new form of leadership correlate?
I think the culture is already changing. Not will shift, it is shifting. The first shift was this idea, as you were raised correctly, about incentives, that you will find more and more the review process is 360 degrees evaluation. So you no longer have the private one-to-one evaluation. In almost all large companies, you have some form of, peer and subsidiary, subordinate and sort of manager all put together. Because you're getting that 360 view, more and more you're seeing pooled bonuses, so that at least a portion of your variable income is based on the performance of the team. And you're also come to the stage where the process of saying you are set objectives that actually test your willingness to collaborate, you're given active points for teamwork, for sharing.
Yeah.
These things are already in place.
Right.
So that meant the culture is gone from the command and control, but there are still some command and control pieces left. The next stage, which is where we're just emerging, is saying, have the tools really got better? Right? When we can talk non-hierarchically, where lateral conversation takes place, where the ability to rate and review and rank people laterally rather than hierarchically is there.
Yeah.
And when these things can be done to scale rather than through summaries through a cascade or waterfall, are we going to get much better information about status and therefore much better information about potential conflicts and reprioritization? Okay? And we are seeing that just begin to emerge because the quality of the feedback loop is getting better. The people are, always on. They're connected. They have smart devices, and as a result of that, the ubiquity of connectivity and the quality of the devices, there is a much more active. Web 2.0 in that sense was about the fact that the edge wasn't listening anymore; it was also talking.
Would you say that bigger companies that's for them it's much more difficult to adapt or than it is for smaller companies, or is it?
I don't know. I mean, everyone would cite the case of somebody like IBM and how the elephant learned to dance or whatever. When you have scale, you put certain things into place in order to protect that scale from sort of getting unstable. Those things tend to come in the way when you're trying to adapt at speed. That was more true in a hierarchical organization. It is definitely less true in the networked organization because team sizes are naturally smaller. The flatter organization means there are fewer sort of intermediary aggregation points. There is less distance between the message giver and the message recipient. So signal to noise ratios are better. So we're already seeing that shift taking place. And I think in some ways the large organization may actually find it easier once they have decided. Okay? The small organization finds it easier because it can operate in an amorphous state better. Okay? It doesn't need to have all the answers. The large organization needs to have a little more certainty about what it's doing, but when it does it, can execute at scale. So, I think I don't know whether tortoise or hare will win, because I don't think of it as a race. These are two different beasts with two different speeds at which they, it's like, when you see China. Okay, and how China has adapted to the industrialized world. Okay, some people would have said it's not possible, and yet some of those things look like command and control. But you dig deeper into it, and you find that the culture has allowed sideways collaboration. John Seeley Brown and John Hagel have written some great studies, and think, wow, that's what's happening in the motorcycle factory. The production line has become open. People are working in, sort of cycles of competence, and they are able to interact and break the deadlocks.
Go ahead, sorry.
So, that sense of saying, yes, it's true, it's command and control, but yes, it's also true that assembly line was freer to work laterally than many others. I think, those are the sort of lessons when I step back and saying, that's why I think the last book by them is very, very important in trying to understand the organization in the future.
The power of pull.
Correct. That we have moved from stocks to flows. Right? We used to have tools that were dealing with a static approach. Now we need a dynamic approach. then the feedback loops become that much more important. The fact that you live in that kind of matrix with contention becomes more important. And, it is being resolved, but it's a fundamental shift.
Yeah. One last question, and
Sure.
a very short answer. We are here in London, financial capital, one of the world. When will the financial sector learn about all this?
I think the financial sector is learning about all this. When I was at Dresdner Kleinwert, I enjoyed some of the things we did from 2003 onwards in the use of blogs and wikis and instant messaging. When you look at how Bloomberg was working with chat, when you look at how Thomson Reuters was delivering information, the places where the enterprise bus and the publish-subscribe model were most taking hold, a lot of these were already operating in financial circles far before any other. The challenge, which is to protect the customer, is that these are regulated industries.
Okay.
And so when the social tools were still in the Wild West, they had to come to a point where archival was guaranteed, where retrieval was easy, but conversations were recorded, that the ability to make sure that if you had to have certain authority or certain certification before you could participate in a function, that was tested, that Chinese walls to separate different parts of an organization because of the risk of market abuse, could be put into place. So once you said we are moving into a regulated space, the tools had to become fit for purpose. That has been happening over the last 5 years.
Okay.
And now I am aware of a number of very serious experiments as to how to take the Web 2.0 type environment, Enterprise 2.0 type environment, and make it an active part. In fact, my next meeting is just on that subject alone with a major bank, but I cannot say which one.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your time. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.